The wind howled across the broken land. Dust and metal fragments danced in the air like ghosts. The planet was silent, except for the low hum of David's scanner as he walked among the ruins. He was a human engineer, one of the last sent to explore what was left of the war. Once, this world had been full of life, cities that floated, towers that touched the clouds. Now, only ashes remained. David's boots sank into the mud as he scanned a fallen structure. The scanner beeped, again and again, louder this time. He frowned, adjusting the signal. "That can't be right," he whispered to himself. It wasn't metal or energy. It was a heartbeat. He followed the sound through a narrow tunnel, broken walls glowing faintly under his flashlight. Each step echoed, and the air grew colder. Something inside him told him to turn back, but curiosity pushed him forward. When he reached the end, he saw a small figure lying under broken beams. It was a child, but not human. Her skin was pale blue, glowing slightly under the light. Her hair floated softly like silk in water. David froze, staring, unsure if she was alive. He knelt down, brushed away the dust, and pressed his scanner near her neck. "Pulse detected," the scanner said in a robotic voice. David's eyes widened. "You're still alive," he whispered. Her chest moved weakly, struggling for breath, each inhale shorter than the last. He lifted her gently, surprised by how light she was. Her skin felt cold, almost fragile. As he carried her back to his rover, her lips moved. She whispered something so faint he almost didn't hear it. "Help me, human." David's heart squeezed. He placed her inside the rover, attaching a small oxygen mask from his emergency kit. Her breathing steadied a little, though her skin still trembled. He looked at her face. It was peaceful, almost angelic. "Who are you, little one?" he murmured, as the rover drove back to his shelter. Thunder rolled above the planet. Lightning flashed over the horizon, showing shadows of fallen cities and burnt forests. David thought of the reports. The Galactic War had wiped out this species completely, so how could this child be alive? Inside the shelter, he laid her on the bed and scanned her body. Her lungs were damaged, not built for Earth-type oxygen. He connected her to his life support system, giving her a steady flow of air. Slowly, her color returned. When her eyes opened, they were bright silver, glowing softly in the dim light. She looked around, frightened. David raised his hand slowly. "It's okay. You're safe now," he said gently. Her voice came out weak. "You, human?" "Yes," he said. "I'm David, an engineer. I found you in the ruins." She blinked, studying his face. "Everyone, gone," she whispered. "Fire. Sky broke. Then, nothing." Tears formed in her eyes, running down her pale cheeks. David felt a strange pain in his chest. He wanted to tell her she was safe, that everything would be okay. But he couldn't, because even he didn't know if it was true. He brought her a blanket, wrapping it around her small body. "Rest now," he said. "You're safe here." She looked at him, her eyes trembling with confusion and hope. "Human," she whispered again. "Call me your daughter." David froze. For a second, he thought he had misheard her, but she repeated, "Please, call me your daughter." Then her eyes closed, and she fell into deep sleep. David sat there for a long time, staring at the child who wasn't human. He felt something inside him, something he hadn't felt since his own family died years ago. A warmth, a sense of purpose, mixed with fear. He didn't know her name, her people, or why she was here, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let her die. Outside, the storm grew stronger, lightning tearing across the dark sky. The scanners beeped again, showing strange energy signals moving under the surface. Maybe others were still alive, or maybe something else was waking up. David looked down at the sleeping child and whispered, "I don't know who you are, but I'll protect you." The wind howled louder, as if the planet itself had heard his promise. And somewhere deep in the ruins, another signal blinked, watching, recording, waiting. When the alien child opened her eyes again, the storm had passed. Soft light came through the cracks of the shelter walls. She looked around, confused but breathing slowly through the oxygen mask. David sat beside her, tired eyes watching the monitor. He had not slept all night. He had spent hours running scans, checking her blood, her lungs, her DNA. Every result told him the same thing. She wasn't like any race still alive. Her biology was delicate, her lungs almost destroyed by the planet's air. Without help, she would die within days. David rubbed his face, whispering to himself, "I can fix this. I have to." He had built machines that could survive the void of space. Surely he could build something to help one fragile child breathe. He started designing artificial lungs, tiny filters made of nanocarbon fibers that could clean the air before it entered her body. He worked silently, his tools humming softly in the quiet shelter. The child watched him from the bed, her silver eyes following every move. After some time, she spoke, her voice soft. "You, human, what is your name?" David looked up and smiled slightly. "David," he said. "What's yours?" She thought for a moment, her eyes distant. "Aria," she whispered. "It means the one who remembers." David nodded slowly, repeating it. "Aria." It felt strange on his tongue, yet comforting. She tilted her head, watching him. "You help me. Why?" He paused, unsure how to answer. Maybe because he saw in her eyes the same loneliness that lived inside him. Maybe because he couldn't stand losing. "Gee, another life. I just couldn't leave you there," he said simply. Hours turned into days. David worked without rest, building the first prototype. He modified the oxygen tubes, adjusted pressure valves. Aria would often sit nearby, drawing on his data pad, making tiny pictures of stars and animals. Sometimes she would hum a tune, soft and strange, like a lullaby from another world. One night, David caught her looking at him quietly. When their eyes met, she smiled shyly and said, "Thank you, Father." David froze again, his heart jumping. He wanted to correct her, to say he wasn't her father, but the words never came out because a part of him didn't want to deny it. Instead, he sighed and said softly, "Rest, Aria." She closed her eyes, whispering, "Good night, human father." David chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "Stubborn little alien," he said, though his eyes were warm. The next morning, he installed the artificial lungs. It was risky. If anything went wrong, she could die. He carefully connected the system, guiding the air through the device and into her body. Minutes passed like hours. Then suddenly, she gasped, her chest rising freely, her eyes opened wide. For the first time, Aria breathed without pain. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She looked around the room, laughing softly. David felt a lump in his throat as she whispered, "I can breathe. Father, I can breathe." He smiled, hiding the emotion in his voice. "Told you I'd fix it." But deep inside, he knew this peace wouldn't last, because while Aria played with the light, running her small hands through the sunlight beam, David received a message on his console. The screen flashed red. "Urgent transmission from Galactic Authority." He opened it, his face turning pale as he read the words. "Unauthorized contact with alien life is a violation of Galactic Law 47. Report location immediately." Or face termination. His hands trembled. They knew. He looked over at Aria, who was humming softly, drawing little stars on the metal floor with a laser pen. She looked so happy, so alive. How could he hand her over to them? They wouldn't care about her. They would take her away, study her, maybe destroy her to keep the peace. David turned off the screen and whispered, "No one is taking you from me." He sat beside her, watching her laugh for the first time. It was a sound that felt warmer than any sun. In that moment, he stopped being an engineer. He became something else, a protector, a father. That night, while Aria slept, David began sealing the shelter's signals. He blocked transmissions, erased traces, hid his location from scanners. Outside, the galaxy might call him a criminal, but in his heart, he knew he was doing what was right. He looked at her one last time before resting his head. Her breathing was calm now. Her small hand rested near his, and for the first time in years, David whispered with a tired smile, "Good night, my daughter." Outside, the sky shimmered with faint blue light. Somewhere far above, a satellite turned its lens toward the planet, recording everything, sending it quietly back to the Galactic Authority. The hunters had found their trail, and they were coming. The soft sound of Aria's laughter filled the small metal shelter. It echoed against the cold walls, gentle and alive. David watched her trying to balance a small tool on her finger, her eyes bright with wonder. In that moment, it was easy to forget that the galaxy outside wanted her gone, but the message on the screen still glowed red in his mind. He had deleted it. Yet the words refused to leave him. Unauthorized contact with alien life. Report immediately or face termination. The law was clear and cruel. Years ago, after the Great War, the Galactic Authority had passed a rule called the Biological Separation Act. It said, no human could raise, protect, or even speak to a non-human species from a restricted world. It was meant to prevent another war, but in truth, it only built walls of fear and hate. David stared at Aria as she played with an old mechanical bird he had repaired for her. She laughed when it chirped, the sound like a small bell in the quiet air. He smiled, but his heart ached. Every smile she gave him was a reminder of the danger he was in. That evening, a faint hum came from outside. David's face changed instantly. He knew that sound. A surveillance drone scanning for heat signatures. He grabbed his cloak and ran outside, his boots kicking up dust. Above him, the sky shimmered as the drone's red light swept across the valley. He hurried back inside, his voice low but firm. "Aria, go to the lower room, now." She blinked, confused. "Why, father?" "No questions, please," he said, trying not to sound afraid. Aria nodded and crawled into the hidden tunnel beneath the floor. He covered it quickly, then turned off all power except a single emergency lamp. The drone passed overhead, its light shining through the cracks. David held his breath. The soft hum grew louder, then slowly faded away. He waited several minutes before exhaling, his body shaking with relief. Aria climbed back up quietly, her silver eyes wide. "Were they bad people?" she asked. David nodded. "They're the kind of people who don't like what they don't understand." She tilted her head. "But I didn't do anything wrong." He smiled sadly. "You didn't, Aria. They just don't see the world the way you do." That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat at his workbench, staring at an old photo of his wife and daughter, both lost years ago in a mining accident. Aria had awakened something in him he thought was gone. She gave him a reason to care again, but now that same reason could destroy them both. The next morning, while Aria was drawing pictures on the metal wall, David turned on his communicator. He needed to find a solution. Any loophole, any safe place. He typed a coded message to an old friend in the engineering guild asking for help. Minutes later, a reply came through, short and cold. "David, are you out of your mind? The authority scans everything. Delete this message now." He did, but it was too late. A warning signal flashed on the console. Transmission detected. Location tagged. David cursed under his breath, running to the power switch. He shut everything down, plunging the room into darkness. Aria looked up from her drawings. "Father, what happened?" He forced a smile. "Just a power cut, nothing to worry about." But inside, panic raced through his veins. He knew what would come next. The authority would send an inspection ship, maybe even soldiers. Later that day, as he checked the outer sensors, he found a small glowing mark on the rock outside the shelter. A tracking beacon. He crushed it under his boot, but the damage was done. They had his coordinates now. When he returned, Aria was sitting quietly, looking at the artificial lungs on the table. "Did I make you break your rules?" she asked softly. David froze. "What do you mean?" She looked down. "I heard your message last night. I know someone told you not to help me." Her voice trembled. "Am I a mistake?" David knelt beside her, lifting her chin so she would look at him. "No, Aria," he said firmly. "You are not a mistake. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "Then why are you afraid?" He took a deep breath. "Because the people in power forgot what it means to be human." Aria placed her small blue hand on his. "Then I'll remind them," she said quietly. Her words made him smile and ache at the same time. Outside, the sky darkened. In the distance, engines roared, the sound of a ship entering the atmosphere. The Galactic Authority was coming. David stood by the window, heart pounding. He whispered, "They can have my life, but not hers." Behind him, Aria whispered, "Father, what will we do?" He turned to her and said, "We run." The engines grew louder, shaking the ground beneath them, and as the first light from the descending ship lit up the night sky, David grabbed Aria's hand and whispered, "Hold on tight, my daughter. No matter what happens, don't let go." The ground shook as the galactic ship broke through the clouds. Dust and fire covered the sky, lighting up the ruins like burning stars. David grabbed Aria's hand, pulling her toward the underground tunnel. "Come on," he said, his voice calm but shaking inside. Aria looked back once at the small shelter that had been their home. The lights flickered one last time before the roof collapsed. They ran through the tunnels beneath the old colony station. The air was thick with dust and metal beams groaned above them. David's flashlight flickered, but his hand never let go of hers. Behind them, the sound of heavy boots echoed. The authority had landed. When they reached the old mining chamber, David stopped, breathing hard. He pressed a code into his wrist device, and a hidden door opened in the wall. Inside was an old escape pod, half buried in rock. He had repaired it months ago, just in case. Now that just in case had arrived, Aria looked scared, but tried to stay brave. "Will it fly?" she asked softly. David smiled, brushing the dust from her cheek. "It will, if I say so." He helped her climb in, strapping her to the seat. Then he powered up the controls, his fingers moving fast. Engines hummed weakly, then roared to life. Outside, a voice boomed through a speaker. This is the Galactic Authority. Surrender the alien life form immediately. David froze for a moment, listening to the cold voice echo through the ruins. He knew they would show no mercy. He also knew he couldn't give her up. He activate. At the launch sequence. Hold on tight, he said. The pod shot upward with a roar, blasting through the crumbling ceiling. Rocks and dust rained down as they broke free into the open air. Arya screamed and laughed at the same time, her hands gripping his arm. The stars appeared above them, endless and bright. For a few seconds, it felt like freedom. But then the alarms blared. 2 drones were chasing them, firing plasma bolts through the thin clouds. David twisted the pod sharply, dodging one shot. The second one grazed the wing, sending sparks flying. "Father!" Arya cried. "I'm fine," he said, forcing a smile. "Just a little turbulence." He rerouted the power and boosted the engines. The pod dived into a canyon of glowing rocks hiding among the shadows. The drones followed, their lights scanning through the fog. David opened a small compartment and handed Arya a metal box. "Remember this," he said. "It's your lungs core, the heart of the machine." She looked confused. "What does it do?" "It keeps you alive," he said. "But if the system fails, this can also restart your body's air filters." She nodded slowly, clutching the box close. It looked like a simple piece of metal, but it carried his life's work. The pod shook again as another blast hit nearby. David's hand moved fast across the console. He connected wires, bypassed systems, and rerouted the engines manually. Arya watched in awe. "You fix everything," she said. He laughed softly. "That's my job." Then his face turned serious. "But you have a job too, to survive." They broke free of the canyon, shooting toward the upper atmosphere. The drones followed, but their engines began to overheat. David smiled when he saw the temperature spikes on his radar. "Come on, you metal vultures," he muttered. He released 2 old fuel cells from the back of the pod and ignited them. A massive explosion burst behind them, destroying both drones in a single flash. For a moment, silence filled the small cabin. Arya looked out the window, eyes wide with wonder. The stars stretched around them like rivers of light. "It's beautiful," she whispered. David nodded slowly. "Yes, it is." Then his voice softened. "And it's all yours now." But his console flashed again. Incoming transmission. He hesitated, then opened it. A cold voice spoke. "David Holt, you have violated Galactic Law 71. Return to base or be terminated." He laughed bitterly. "You already tried," and turned the signal off. Arya looked at him, her eyes full of confusion. "Why do they hate us?" she asked. He stared out at the stars for a long moment before answering. "Because they fear what love can do," he said quietly. The pod's fuel was running low. He scanned nearby systems and found one with strange energy readings. It was deep inside a nebula, uncharted and dangerous, but it was also the only place the Authority couldn't follow. He turned the pod toward it, engines burning. Arya leaned her head against his arm, her eyes half closed. "Will we be safe there?" she asked. David looked ahead at the swirling colors of the nebula. "I don't know," he said, "but we'll be together, and that's enough." As the pod entered the glowing clouds, lightning flashed around them. The ship rattled violently, lights flickering. David gripped the controls, whispering to himself, "Hold together, old girl, just a little longer." Then everything went white. The pod vanished into the storm, and somewhere in the endless light, a small heartbeat kept beating, steady and alive. The stars spun like silver storms outside the cracked window of the small ship. David gripped the controls, sweat running down his forehead. Sparks jumped from a broken panel, lighting the cabin in flashes. They had survived the nebula's lightning, but barely. Arya sat strapped in the seat beside him, coughing softly. Her artificial lungs hissed and clicked as they worked to clean the thin air. David checked the monitor, relieved to see her heartbeat steady. "We made it," he whispered. "We're still alive." Arya looked out at the colors beyond the glass. The nebula was a swirling sea of purple, blue, and gold. It looked peaceful, but David knew better. Hidden inside this beauty could be dangers worse than any law. For hours, they drifted quietly. The ship's engine was damaged, running on backup power. David worked to repair it, using scraps of wire and parts from old systems. Arya handed him tools, watching every move. "You fix things even when they are broken too much," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "That's what engineers do." When he finally powered the engine again, a faint hum filled the air. He leaned back, exhausted but proud. Then the radar blinked red. A signal, faint but moving fast. Someone was tracking them. David's stomach dropped. The Galactic Authority had followed their trail even here. He cursed under his breath. They just won't stop. He turned off all lights and set the ship to silent mode. The hum of the engines faded until only silence remained. Araya held his hand, sensing his fear. "Are they bad again?" she asked. "Yes," he said softly. "They think saving you is a crime." She frowned, her small fingers tightening around his. "Then we run again," she whispered. David smiled sadly. "Yes, we run again." They moved deeper into the nebula. Lightning flashed outside, and strange shadows moved in the mist. Araya leaned close to the window, pointing. "Look," she said. "Lights." David looked too, and his heart skipped. There, hidden behind the golden clouds, was a massive structure, old, broken, but alive. It looked like a giant ship half buried in the nebula's fog. He guided their small craft closer. As they approached, blue energy symbols glowed along its sides, ancient alien writing. David scanned it, eyes widening. "This isn't human," he murmured. "It's older than the war." They landed near a broken hangar and stepped inside. The air was davros, old and thin, filled with echoes of machines that hadn't moved for centuries. Aria's eyes lit up. "It feels familiar," she whispered. David looked at her sharply. "You've been here before?" She shook her head. "Not me, but my people." They explored the ship's corridors. Lights flickered weakly, reacting to their presence. Strange murals covered the walls. Paintings of humans and blue-skinned aliens standing side by side. David stopped, staring at one image, a human holding an alien child under a shining star. Araya touched the wall, her hand glowing faintly where it met the symbol. "The ancestors," she whispered. "They knew your kind." David felt a chill. The Galactic Authority had told everyone that humans and her race had always been enemies. But this place told another story, a story of friendship and betrayal. Before he could say more, his wrist device beeped, multiple signals approaching fast. He ran to the ship's control room and looked at the radar. Authority drones were entering the nebula. They had found them again. Araya looked at him with calm eyes. "We fight?" David shook his head. "No, we outsmart them." He connected the ship's power core to the ancient system. The walls of the old vessel began to glow brighter. Symbols lit up like stars, forming a pattern. The ship wasn't just ancient, it was alive. A voice echoed through the hall, soft but powerful. "Recognition. Human and hybrid detected. Initializing defense protocol." Araya gasped, her hand glowing again. The entire ship came alive, its lights flashing, its weapons activating. Outside, the Authority drones opened fire. Bolts of plasma tore through the mist. David gritted his teeth, pulling levers and activating the shields. The old ship responded like a sleeping giant waking from a long dream. Energy shields formed around them, blocking the attacks. Lasers fired back, destroying the drones one BC shy. One, the battle lit up the nebula like fireworks. Araya stood beside David, watching in awe. The light reflected in her silver eyes as she whispered, "They will never stop, will they?" David shook his head. "No, but neither will we." When the last drone exploded, silence returned. The old ship powered down, its systems cooling like a sigh. David leaned against the console, exhausted. Araya came closer, placing her small hand on his arm. "You protected me again," she said softly. He smiled. "No, Araya. This time you protected both of us." Outside, the nebula glowed with soft light. David looked at the murals once more. Maybe this was more than an escape. Maybe it was a beginning. But far behind them, the Galactic Fleet had already received their coordinates. The real hunt was about to begin. The nebula glowed like an endless dream around the ancient ship. Purple clouds shimmered with soft lightning, whispering through the silence. David stood by the cracked window, staring into the light. He had seen many stars in his life, but none that looked alive like this. Araya sat nearby, sketching on a metal tablet. Her silver eyes reflected the swirling colors outside. She looked peaceful, almost human now. Her small fingers moved gently as she drew a picture of the old murals they had found. Humans and her kind standing together under a single star. David smiled faintly. "You really like drawing." Araya nodded. "It helps me remember things I never lived." He tilted his head. "How do you remember something you never lived?" She looked at him, eyes full of quiet mystery. "Because maybe memories don't belong only to one life." Her words made him pause. He wondered if her people had passed down knowledge not by teaching, but through blood and spirit. Maybe she carried the last whispers of an entire race inside her. He looked at her lungs device, still glowing faintly on her chest. The heart of the machine was still working perfectly, keeping her alive. Later, while she rested, David explored deeper inside the ancient ship. The corridors were filled with mist and soft humming. He followed the sound until he reached a great chamber filled with glowing pillars. In the center was a giant sphere of light, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. He stepped closer, and the sphere flickered to life. A holographic figure appeared. A tall being, blue-skinned like Arya. It spoke in a calm voice. "Welcome, traveler of Earth." David froze, his heart racing. You know who I am?" he asked. The figure nodded. "We knew your kind long ago, before the wars, before the lies." It showed him images, humans and blue beings building cities together, sharing knowledge, exploring the stars side by side. Then came the darkness. The Galactic Authority, born from fear, decided that two races working as one were too strong. They erased history, destroyed planets, and blamed each side for crimes that never happened. David watched in silence, his hands trembling. The truth was too big, too cruel. The figure continued. "One day, a human scientist made a promise to protect the last child of our kind and hide her until the stars were ready for peace again." David's breath caught. "Arya," he whispered. "That child is her." The hologram nodded. "She is the bridge between hearts." Then the light dimmed, fading back into silence. David stood there, unable to move. He finally understood why the Authority wanted her gone. She wasn't just a survivor. She was proof that the galaxy's history was built on lies. When he returned to the main room, Arya was awake. She looked at him with curious eyes. "You found something." He nodded slowly, kneeling beside her. "Arya, you are more important than you know." She frowned. "Because I'm different?" He smiled. "Because you are the truth." She stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Then they'll never stop chasing us." David touched her shoulder gently. "Then we make them listen." He walked to the cons. Turning on the communication system. "Father, what are you doing?" she asked. He took a deep breath. "Telling the galaxy what they've hidden for centuries." He connected the ship's memory core to the transmitter. Holograms flickered around them. Images of the ancient alliance, the wars, the destroyed worlds. He recorded his voice, calm and steady. "My name is David Holt, human engineer. I have found the last of a race we were told to fear. But she is not our enemy. She is our lost promise." Arya watched him in silence, tears forming in her eyes. The transmission spread through the nebula like a pulse of light. Carried by the ion storms, it escaped into space, across colonies, across outposts. People began to see the truth. But at that same moment, alarms blared inside the ship. The radar showed multiple contacts, Authority battleships entering the nebula. They had tracked the signal. David's voice stayed calm. "They're here." Arya stood beside him, her small hand glowing faintly. She looked scared but determined. "Then let them come." The old ship trembled as the first wave of plasma fire hit the shields. Lights flickered, systems strained. David worked the controls, trying to keep the shields up. Arya ran to help, her fingers moving over the panels instinctively. The ancient ship seemed to respond to her touch. It was as if it recognized her as its own. Explosions rocked the walls, but neither of them stopped. David looked at her and said quietly, "If anything happens to me, promise you'll live." She shook her head fiercely. "No, Father, we live together." Outside, lightning danced across the nebula, wrapping around the ships. The battle raged between truth and silence, between heart and control, and at its center, a human and an alien child, fighting side by side. As another explosion shook the floor, Arya turned to him, her voice strong. "You once said machines don't have hearts." David looked at her, breathing hard. "Yes." She smiled softly. "Then maybe humans are the real machines until they learn how to love." The ship's power core glowed brighter than ever. The storm outside grew wild, and somewhere deep within the nebula, a signal spread farther and farther. The truth had escaped, and no one, not even the Authority, could stop it now. The storm outside the nebula burned brighter than ever. Lightning twisted like dragons of light, roaring through the dark. The ancient ship trembled under the fire of the galactic fleet. David held the controls tight, his knuckles white. The air was hot, filled with smoke and the sound of alarms. Arya stood beside him, her silver eyes glowing. Every system in the ship responded to her presence. The walls pulsed with blue light, almost alive. "Father," she said softly, "they're everywhere." David nodded, sweat dripping from his face. "I know," he said, "but we won't give up." Outside, hundreds of ships surrounded them. Their voices echoed across the comms. Human vessels surrender the alien life form. David laughed bitterly. They still don't understand. He turned to Aria. They fear what you are, what we are together. She looked up at him, her small hand trembling. Are we going to die? She asked quietly. David looked at her for a long moment, then smiled gently. If this is the end, then I'm proud it's with you. The old ship groaned as another blast hit the side. Sparks flew, panels cracked, systems flickered. David tried to repair the shields, but the energy was nearly gone. He knew they couldn't fight much longer, yet he refused to stop. Aria walked closer and placed her hand on the central console. Instantly, the lights flared brighter. The ship responded to her energy. Symbols appeared across the floor, glowing with power. Father, it listens to me, she whispered. David stared in awe. It's part of you. Outside, the fleet commander spoke again. Final warning, surrender or be destroyed. David pressed the transmit button, A, and spoke with calm anger. You've destroyed enough lives, enough truth. He looked at Aria, then back at the screen. She's just a child, and she's more human than you'll ever be. The commander's voice was cold. Then you'll die with her. Missiles launched from every ship streaking toward the nebula. David closed his eyes, whispering, I'm sorry. But before the blast hit, Aria's body began to glow. The light spread through the entire vessel. The murals on the walls lit up. The ship's ancient systems roared back to life. A massive energy wave erupted from the heart of the machine. It spread through the nebula like a sunrise. Every missile froze midair. Every ship's weapon went silent. The storm outside calmed. The lightning faded. And for the first time in a long time, the galaxy listened. Aria stood in the center of the light, her voice echoing through every frequency. Stop fighting, she said. We are not enemies. Her words carried through space, soft yet powerful. People across planets, colonies, and fleets heard her voice. It reached soldiers, captains, and civilians. It reached hearts that had forgotten how to feel. David watched her, tears in his eyes. She looked radiant, surrounded by light. He realized in that moment that she was doing what no army ever could. She was changing minds, healing wounds, not with weapons, but with truth. The commander's ship tried to resist the signal, but his crew stopped him, one by one. The warships powered down their guns. No one wanted to fire anymore. No one wanted to kill a father and his daughter. David collapsed to his knees, exhausted. The battle was over, but his strength was gone. Aria ran to him, her small hands shaking. Father, stay with me, she cried. He smiled weakly, brushing her cheek. You called me father so many times, he whispered. I never said yes. His voice cracked as tears filled his eyes. But you were right, Aria, he said softly. I am your father. Aria's tears fell like silver drops. Then don't leave me, she whispered. He smiled faintly. You don't need me, Al. Nymore, you have the galaxy. Her hand glowed brighter, trying to heal him, but he shook his head slowly. No, don't waste it. Live, Aria, live. The light around her pulsed, spreading across the nebula again. She held him close as his heartbeat slowed. The last thing he said was a whisper in her ear. You gave me back my heart. And then, silence. The nebula drifted softly, wrapping the ship in its golden glow. Aria stood there alone, the galaxy now listening to her voice. She spoke to them once more. My father was human, she said. He broke their law to show love, and now that love will guide the stars. Years later, stories spread across worlds. Children learned about the man who defied the authority. Statues were built, one of a human holding an alien child under a shining star. They called it the heart of humanity. And somewhere deep in the nebula, where the storms had calmed forever, the old ship still floated, silent and peaceful. Inside, a small light blinked. One heartbeat left in the system, the heart of the machine, still alive, still waiting. And in that endless quiet, a faint voice echoed. Father, I'll make you proud.